Well, thank you very much to all the guys from the Windsor Group and our friends for joining us to this moment on our webinar. We didn't want to wait until the end of the year. We wanted to be able to really communicate with each other quite soon, particularly given what has been going on. And I was just thinking for a moment that it's since we last met in the end of November, the most remarkable things have gone on in the world. If you just think about it, we had the whole Greta Thunberg global expression on the environment. We saw the wildfires and raising climate again in New Zealand. We have seen in breathtaking speed the way COVID has come as the health epidemic has hit people. Governments are globally everywhere suffering from the same issues. Financial markets are in volatile conditions, and most recently we've seen the race issues in the United States. I cannot recall a time when there's been a pulling together globally of so many of these key issues in one place. And those of you who were there last year will remember I had a bird image which I want to follow just in a quick reflection. Remember, we were talking about don't look for this year's birds in last year's nests. Don't look for this year's birds in last year's nests. And I want to just say we are in lockdown, but what we want to do is to be able to look through with Carey, who I'll introduce, and Tony in a moment. We want to look through this, but it's worth recognizing just where we are at the moment. Many of us feel that constraint, that caged feeling, that sense of gridlock, that sense of longing to do things, the frustration that we have that we can't look beyond. And I thought that that would be appropriate to take another bird image taken from another African-American civil rights campaigner, Maya Angelou, who you will know wrote the biography, I Know How the Caged Bird Sings. And I wanted to just read the last stanzas of the poem that she wrote, because it's so typical to our time. The free bird thinks of another breeze, and the trade winds soft through the sighing trees, and the fat worms waiting on a dawn bright lawn, and he names the sky his own. But a caged bird stands on the grave of dreams. His shadow shouts on a nightmare scream. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens his throat to sing. The caged bird sings with a fearful trill of things unknown but longed for still. And his tune is heard on the distant hill, for the caged bird sings of freedom. And there is a sense, I'd like to just look straight at it and to say, I know how the caged bird sings. Even in this lockdown moment, it is because the Spirit of the living God is in our hearts. And even in this lockdown moment, we at Windsor try very hard to balance what Paul, writing to the Ephesians, talks about both reason and revelation. And there is a tension in that. And we want to be able to explore that in our spiritual formation and our engagement in the society around us. We think of those Hebrew slaves in Psalm 137. How can you possibly sing in the wilderness? And yet that's what all of us are doing, individually and in our churches where we cannot meet. But it is the Spirit of the living God that is turning our frustration into a fermentation, a way of stewing in the Spirit, allowing the Spirit of God to bubble up within us. And that is a very important time for us now to reconsider ourselves, our own journey, our prayer life, but also to consider the engagement in our wider society, both what's happening now and what we're likely to see coming out of this. Because it is absolutely true that that which brought you to this place will not take you to the next. The vision that you had before entering this time will not be the same as in the next phase. The tools that we have in this phase will not be the same tools as we will need in the next. I know how the caged bird sings. He sings because the Spirit of God, even in captivity, even in lockdown, even in gridlock, enables us to worship him, and out of the abundance of our hearts, still to be able to sing. And that is the hope that people are looking for, that we can give. Just to say welcome to you, Carey and Tony. Thank you that both of you have joined us. Carey is probably the most influential blogger, leadership author, podcaster. He was a former lawyer, a founder of Connexus Church. And Tony is in her own right very concerned about marriage, has her own podcast on smart families and a new book that's coming out on that. So you're very welcome, you're old friends, and thank you very much for sparing the time. Over to you.
Oh, thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it's really good to connect with you. And Thando, thank you so much. You know, we're happy to take questions on whatever's on your mind. But yeah, Ken asked me if I would share a little bit about that article that's been circulated about 7 new church trends. And then Tony and I are happy to converse about whatever you would like. And so I'll do a quick recitation. Tony's real heart is on relationships and prayer. And our marriage went through a really tough season about 15 years ago where we weren't sure we were going to make it. And that's what your book's about. And then you started this Smart Family podcast with a mutual friend of ours, Rob Meter, who's a pediatrician. And we'll just tell people a little bit about that before I dive into the post.
Sure. Yeah. I worked as a family lawyer. So as I sat in my office across from people, I could see how much pain families were struggling with in general. And my heart also went out to the kids involved. And so Rob is a pediatrician. He sits across the table from families who are struggling with different issues and often behavioral challenges. And so both of us, from the marriage perspective, from the parenting perspective, we just wanted to help families with some extra skills and resources to help people love being home.
Yeah, and you lead the prayer team at Connexus Church, which we started, Connexus about 12 years ago, but we've been doing ministry in this area for 25 years. So, yeah, and I said to Pete and Ken at the beginning and to Thando, a lot of pastors, a lot of us who are pastors, we promise to pray for people and then we don't. But when Tony says she's going to pray for you, she does, which is awesome. So let's talk about church trends. And I'll just start by saying, obviously none of us have the answers. We really don't know. It's hard to figure out what's going on, let alone what's ahead. And so I want to unpack some of the things that I've been thinking about. We're happy to go off script with that too, or just, drill down, double click on some of these issues. But normally I've done a church trends post for the last 5 years at the beginning of January. And then my team came to me and other leaders and they're like, yeah, well, with the world having changed as fundamentally as it has in the last 3 months, could we write a new one? So I really started thinking about it. And again, these are all in pencil. Nothing's in pen these days. We don't really know which end is up. But I do know that the future is unkind to the unprepared. And so you really want to be prepared. And as much as nobody could see COVID coming, I mean, I've thought about this many times, but in January, if someone said all borders will be shut down, we'll be in the biggest job loss in modern history, perhaps in centuries, and there'll be an invisible virus that keeps you locked in your home, and industries will collapse. It would be like, excuse me, I thought everything was going great, and here, and churches won't be allowed to meet in their buildings. It's like, what? So we're just in this really weird thing. As a friend of mine said about 2 months ago, I guess about a month ago, as America started to reopen the church. And I've visited the UK a couple of times. I'm a Canadian. So even though I'm a US green card holder, we're north of Toronto. I really see things through a Canadian lens as much as I spend a lot of my life in the US. And, Americans are kind of like an interesting bird. They There's a lot of cowboy left in them, and they were going to reopen as soon as possible. And as our church is closed in days, but the reopening is promising to be far more complicated than closing a church ever was. So trend and crisis as a general rule, and particularly this one, is a disruptor, but it's also a revealer and an accelerator. And I think we're learning things about ourselves, we're learning things about the church, and we're learning things about the kingdom while we're going through this, and crisis accelerates things. So to give the best example I know, because sometimes when you're so close to the church, you don't see it because you're in it. It's like the fish going, how's the water? It's like, well, what do you mean water? What is water, right? You just swim in it, so you don't see it. But Ken and I have talked about this. We've had a couple of conversations since COVID started. And every CEO I talk to, including personal friends, thought leaders, they're saying they are rethinking office space, because a lot of them were sort of stuck in the 90s and PCs and the whole deal. And they're like, in-person works. Like, you have to be face-to-face. That's how business is done. That's how it's always been done. And a lot of them, even the tech companies in Silicon Valley, this is so ironic. I didn't even know this until the crisis. They insisted on in-person work. And it's like, no, you can't work remotely. We're building Facebook, we're building Twitter, but you have to be in the office. And now everybody's rethinking that. And CEOs move fast because they're bottom line motivated. So from personal friends to business leaders I connect with, they're all like, yeah, we're going to greatly reduce our square footage. Working from home actually results in greater productivity. A lot of employees are interested. So I did a course 6 months ago called the High Impact Workplace, where I predicted that this is where the future would go. And then, people were like, really? People are going to work from home? That doesn't work. And all of a sudden, boom, here we are in June 2020. And like, yeah, corporate world has shifted. It'll never be the same again. And now there are big questions about, commercial real estate. But that's how crisis is an accelerator. We would have gotten here a decade from now with remote work, but it just happened in 3 months instead of 5 to 10 years. So I think some of that's happening in the church too. So one of the things, and again, I work very closely these days with David Kinnaman, who is the premier poller of America, but also globally. He's done Scottish studies over at Barna. And so he and I talk almost every few days about the latest data, and we're doing real-time polling. So it is based a little bit on data, but even David would tell you, we don't really know where this is going, but he thinks it's a disruption. Everyone I talk to thinks it's a disruption. And one of the suspicions I have, the theory I have, is that church consolidation is happening. So if you look at some of the data that Barna has gathered, they asked former churchgoers, what have you done with online church in the last 30 days? And the shocking result, when I saw this, I texted David, I'm like, is this number right? 48% said they had done nothing with church in the last month. Nothing. They haven't watched. Obviously, they haven't gone because you can't go. And it's like, you used to be a church goer. This is not unchurched people. And then 23% of people who had watched church online said they were either watching other churches or were also watching other churches. So, for example, Tony and I might watch Connexus Church that we helped found, but then we're going to go over and check out Elevation or Mike Todd at Tulsa, or we'll watch Holy Trinity Brompton in the UK or something. And it's like, okay, what is this? And I'm thinking it's consolidation. We have picked up, actually on Sunday, I preached at our church. We had 2 Muslims in London, England. So we're Toronto based, north of Toronto. 2 Muslims in London, England, conversing with each other in the chat. Like, how does that happen? Like, what kind of world do we live in? That happened just a few days ago. And the market economists would call that market consolidation. So this happened in the book industry in the 90s. All these little independent bookstores I'm going to speak American because that's my context, got bought up by, kind of out-marketed by Barnes & Noble, by Borders, and some of the big box retailers. Target and Walmart got into the book buying business. And so all these little independent shops go out. And you've seen that, right? Like in the UK, my limited exposure in your country, I've been there twice, and we were supposed to be there again, but both of our trips got canceled this year. Anyway, is all these little churches, right, kind of got gobbled up. They just kind of died off. But then a church like Holy Trinity Brompton or some of your churches come along, the C3 movement, and they start to expand. Hillsong would be an example of that. So people who used to go to smaller churches now go to larger churches. That's just called market consolidation. So it's not that people stop buying books. It's just instead of going to this little shop over there, that little shop over there, we're actually now going to Borders or to Barnes and Noble. And then what happened in the last 10 years, Amazon comes along, online comes along, and now they're starting to cannibalize the big box retailers. So Barnes and Noble's not having the past it does. Amazon is cannibalizing JCPenney, which filed for bankruptcy, or J. Crew, so on and so forth. So that's just called consolidation. So what's happened in America is the mega churches, to some extent, were reaching unchurched people, but they were consolidating the market when it came to people who said, you know, we're not going to go to our little church of 50 people. We're going to go to the Life Church with Craig Rochelle that opened up 20 minutes away. And we're going to do that, or we're going to go to North Point. So it kind of consolidated, took some Christians, and obviously they're reaching non-Christians. I think that's happening right now with online church, because people are realizing it's not driving to another city, it's typing in another URL. It's Google searching and going, oh, I saw this guy on social, but he's an amazing communicator. So I'm thinking when the dust settles, that larger churches will have gotten larger, and that the online ministry, like I talked to Mike Todd from Transformation Church, he says their numbers, which were massive pre-COVID, are 10x now that COVID is happening. What happened to us? We've been doing online church for 4 years. Yeah, 4 years this month, actually. And our online numbers have, well, doubled, tripled, quadrupled sometimes. And so we don't know all these people yet. That software and AI is coming. We can talk about it in the questions, but that is a massive trend. And that means that those that are winning are probably going to get more, and churches that are declining. Like, I think when not very effective churches reopen, they're going to discover it's smaller than we ever dreamed, because it's really hard to track what's online. So that's a really big trend. I'll move through the others quickly. Trend number 2, the return to church might not be the rush leaders hope for. So this story is playing out across Canada or the US right now, where I'm getting messages almost every day from leaders who are like, wow, it is dead. Like, obviously COVID is going to take some people out. You've got no kids, you've got no senior adults because there's no vaccine. People aren't sure about masks or social distancing. But like, numbers are now like, they're 10% of what they were, they're 20%, 30%, 40%. So that early data is rolling in. I think it's a fact that this has accelerated, the crisis has accelerated lower church attendance. It's accelerated the idea that we're going to attend less often, or we're going to now default to online. So it's just not this rush to church that everybody thought about. And some of that is COVID related, but I think once there's a vaccine, if the world gets back to normal, which it probably will, not normal, the new normal, but then we will get to the point where we're like, okay, all things being equal, we're 50% of what we were pre-COVID, we're 80%, we're 90% of what we were. And I think part of that is the switch to digital default church. So I just think that's something we have to pay attention to. Now, crisis is an accelerator, but it's also an incubator for innovation and an incubator for breakthroughs. So I'm kind of beating the online drum, not because I don't love in person. I love in person, but I just think there's more potential there. And that leads us to trend number 3. Churches will become digital organizations with physical locations. So think about what happened to malls in America and around the world. Well, particularly, I know North America, so we'll just talk North America, is they were booming in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, kind of hit their zenith in the 80s, and then the internet started, and online commerce was kind of wonky in the 90s, and then it really started to move in the last 20 years. But what happened was a lot of big box retailers and bricks and mortar retailers said, oh, we should add a website, but they were physical organizations with a digital expression. Those guys are all going away now. Like, this crisis has accelerated their failure. Amazon went the other way. They were 100% digital. And then they said, oh, let's open some stores. And so Amazon started getting into the store business. Tesla would be an example of an automaker where, you know, they don't really have $1 million of inventory and tens of thousands of square feet of showroom. No, they've just got, like, they're in a mall. It's like, we're really an online organization, and here's a car you can look at. We don't even have all the models in the showroom. It's like, whoa, that's different. But they're a digital organization with physical expressions. I think the church is going to become a digital default organization. You look at the growing churches, and their online presence has been a lot bigger already. So I just think one of the flips you can make is to start thinking of yourself as a digital organization, because digital scales in a way physical doesn't. And then you'll start to staff that way. You'll start to think that way. And will you always have physical gatherings? Of course, you'll always have physical gatherings. You're going to gather in homes. You're going to break bread, when you're allowed to do that again. You're going to gather for worshipful expressions. But if you look at, for those of you who had significant online presences before COVID, your online numbers were already bigger than your in-person numbers. You just didn't pay attention to them. That's been true for us. And we haven't really tried that hard at online. And online is real. Look at this. We're having an action because people, I get that every day. People go, online isn't real. That's like, well, I don't know. This is real. I think Ken's a real human being. Pete's a real human being. Thanda's a real human being. You're real human beings. And we're connecting. We're actually connecting. So I think we just have to get over that. Number 4, we'll do this quickly. Agility will become one of your most valuable leadership qualities. The future belongs to the pivoters. Most of us do strategic planning once a year. We go off to some beautiful location. And I think we're into the era of 30-day pivots, 60-day pivots, 90-day pivots, where, and the really hard part, and this is hard for me too, because we're all tired, is we say we innovated when COVID hit because we all went to digital church online overnight. I talked to Nikki Gumbel about that. And, he wasn't an online fan, and now he's totally changed his mind. And, within minutes we're online and away we go. And that's great. We did the same thing. We pivoted. But I don't think that's actually innovation. I think that's adaptation. Nobody chose to do that. So we adapted. Now, innovation is completely different. Innovation says we don't have to change, but we're going to. And we already lived in an era of massive disruption, right? There wasn't a huge crisis that forced the taxi industry into decline. It's just a couple of people in Silicon Valley thought, oh, I wonder if people would privately share their cars. And Uber and Lyft were invented. So you see how that changes? It's like there were a couple of people going, maybe people aren't going to print their photos. Maybe they'll share them on a social media app. And Instagram was born, and that killed Kodak, along with a lot of other things. So we already live in a disruptive era. If you're really going to innovate, you don't even need a crisis. You can just say, okay, what if we could reach more people? What if we could reach our city? What if we could try this? What if we can try that? Number 5, virtual and flexible staff teams will be the new normal. Kind of talked about that already, but I think virtual will default. People right now are afraid to go back into public, even where they can. Not everybody wants to go grocery shopping. Not everybody. And people who had no social media accounts created them. People who had no account on Amazon created them. And they're going to realize, oh, I can actually do my shopping online. I can actually do my viewing online. So I think we just moved into a digital default culture. And I've led remote teams for over 20 years, partly out of necessity and over the last 5 years out of choice. And they actually work. Number 6, this is huge, and we can camp on there in the questions, but spiritual formation will shift from facility-based to home-based. The more I think about this, the more I realize we are addicted to our buildings. And I think there's a role for buildings, but I think it's Dave, what's his last name? He's a new lead pastor at Willow Creek, who said, we used to spend millions of dollars to reach thousands of people. Now we'll spend thousands of dollars to reach millions of people online. I think there's truth to that. We are addicted to our facilities. They're expensive, they're limited, and we think ministry only happens in the building. Well, what happened, if you look at when we went to shifting online, online wasn't a supplement to the building, it was a replacement for it while we were all still in lockdown. And I know a lot of you are still in lockdown, you can't reopen. But as churches reopen, what happens is we're going to say, now you can't do ministry in your home anymore, you have to come back. Well, I think theologically, we know that's not true. So I think what'll happen is more than streaming services, we will look at innovative ways to equip people to actually do home-based ministry, to give parents leadership over their children, to get couples praying together again, to say, oh, ministry happens when I go next door and talk to TJ and Lisa, or I talk to John and Gail on the other side, and we pray for them and we interact with them, rather than saying it all has to happen in a building. So I think that's a very exciting trend. Theologically, it's always been true, but practically it hasn't been true. And then finally, on-demand access will eclipse live events. So this is fun. Like, we have 200 people on this webinar right now, and I don't know what you're going to do with it. But I promise you, if you make it go live and share it publicly, probably 10x people will watch it after. Why? Because, well, it was 3:30. I already had a meeting and I couldn't make it. And I was going to do it, and then I just got too tired, so I kind of bailed on it, which is happening with church all the time. Now, if you look at your online numbers, your live numbers are one thing, But our streaming numbers, like our on-demand numbers for 7 days after a message goes live, are almost always 2, 3, 4, 5, 10x what they are for the live event. You look at podcasting, right? I release a podcast every Tuesday and some Thursdays. And on a good day, we'll get like 15 to 20,000 downloads on the day something releases. But then it will be 4 or 5x over time as people listen to it. Because when you're listening to a podcast, you don't care that it was released an hour ago. You care about whether it was a good interview. In fact, when you discover a podcast, you'll go back and binge listen to a whole thing, not really caring that it was started in 2017. You're just like, oh, this is really good content, so I'm going to go back, listen to everything. That is how church will be consumed in the future. And that's your best marketing opportunity, because you did a parenting series last November and you think, oh, that's done. But there are people waking up going, I don't know how to handle my kids, or I think I'm going to divorce you. And your relationship teaching, or I think I'm becoming an atheist. So your apologetic series that you did 2.5 years ago is as relevant to them today as it was when you preached it. And so one of the reasons my platform has grown, it's not like I'm writing 100 articles a day. I'm writing 1 or 2 new pieces of content a week, but people are accessing the back catalog. And when they access the back catalog, Google says, oh, you think this is valuable? And then Google bumps it up in the search rankings. And so on demand way outpaces. It's like Netflix, right? We watch The Office most nights if we're home, watch an episode. I don't care that it went out of production 5 years ago. I think it's a great series 7 years ago. Like, we just love that show. And same with Friends, one of the most downloaded series in the world. So those are some thoughts. And I think flexibility and agility are going to be some superpowers in the future. I probably said more than I needed to say, but why don't we open it up and see what questions people have. Tony, would you want to add anything to that, or anything you're seeing or sensing?
Well, yeah, in terms of the spiritual formation, shifting to home-based, I think that has such exciting potential for the church. I mean, I think there are so many ways that we can equip parents, as you mentioned, to be involved in the spiritual formation of their kids, and even home group, small group leaders, for church leaders to pour even more resources into the hands of those leaders. It just, helps us spread the word through our neighborhoods.
It also can go way more viral. I mean, if you focus, rather than getting everyone, if you were to diagram this out, everybody has to come here. But if you see this as the center that equips 100 homes or 200 homes, 2,000 homes, the spread is much, much bigger.
Yeah, I think that's what I was trying to get at, that the equipping, when that equipping, when more of the focus and attention is placed on equipping, and even if those resources are available online and the equipping can even go beyond your individual community, there's just so much potential.
Yeah.
That's awesome. We had a great moment this last Sunday. We've got a couple of great leaders. I think they're on this call, Adam and Hannah Heather, who were hosting our digital church service from home with their little 1-year-old running in and out of the picture and participating even in communion. And there was this moment she prophesied, this little 1-year-old, she just said, Mummy, Daddy, the juice is for everyone. The juice is for everyone. And I just felt like it wasn't just a prophecy, it was showing the holiness of the home. It was breaking down that divide between the addiction to buildings, as you say, and the home. There's some great questions, Carey. Thank you. And Tony, that was fantastic. I don't know, 1 minute I think you're comforting me, and the next you're really disrupting and worrying me. So thank you. Michael Ramsden, new president of RZIM. I think you're present. We're going to unmute you because I know you've got a question.
Thank you. That was very interesting, and I loved the article too, which I read when Ken kindly sent it. The two questions I had were, one, if you're, say, living in London, sharing a small flat with 3 other workers, or you've got young kids running around, lockdown has been really challenging. So my brother, who helps run Goldman Sachs, has loved lockdown because he has space, distance, and money. But it seems that for the poor, it's been more challenging to see it as a beneficial experience. The second one is slightly different, and obviously this does need to remain slightly confidential, but when I was at Facebook HQ, speaking, I asked some of the senior employees if Facebook would discriminate against church posts, and they didn't even hesitate. They said, yes, of course. And I said, well, how do you know that? And they said, oh, well, when we post stuff, we can see the algorithms like randomly taking down things we posted so that people who should be able to see it can't. So I asked them what they did, and they said they could speak to leadership, and they have been able to reverse it. Hey, why can't I invite people to my barbecue, at church? But it's all to do with how hate speech works. And so one of my concerns is, how do we keep the church visible if it's online, if some of the tech we want to use has been built in to actually make sure that we're not always maybe reaching or even visible to those who may even be looking for us? Does that make sense? Even if people within this and their accounts are being treated that way, what may be happening to ours? And so is it all good news?
Michael, thank you. I think your comment that quarantine lockdown has been really liberating for some and challenging for others is absolutely true. I was reading a piece today about suicide rates with unemployment. I know you're really deeply concerned about domestic violence and the impact on kids. And, nobody really, some people signed up to be homeschoolers, but most people didn't. And now everybody's homeschooling. And I think the pressures on family, that's one of the reasons they bumped up your book publication to the fall. It was supposed to come out in January, but the publisher just said, we have to get this message out right away. Any thoughts on that, on lockdown strategies for people? Because some of the people on this call may be in that place where they're like, yeah, we haven't got 5 acres to roam. And,
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a tough problem. And I would see as a call for the church. I mean, that is, the church used to be the social institution that did provide relief for people. And I think that's a question for all of us as church leaders. How do we help just better resource people who are struggling?
Yeah, and I think practical resources. So one of the things we did in the early days of lockdown was we do a Wednesday night Q&A, and I think Jeff's rethinking that, my successor for the summer. But practical things like we brought in a Christian psychologist about sleep and better sleep, or about how to not fight with your family. Like sometimes you can get really practical. And that sort of leads in, Michael, to your second question, which, Facebook for sure. The algorithm is something you can't control. It's not. And it's very unpredictable. And Google's making a massive change to its algorithm as well. And I'm not 100% sure how that works. It's sort of like the secret formula for Coke. Nobody will tell you exactly how the algorithm will work. However, I would not say it's a systemic discrimination, because if you look at like Michael Todd, I am Mike Todd from Tulsa, Oklahoma. He has 1.2 million followers. His like little relationship goals series that he did when his church was 200 people literally went viral on Twitter and got millions of views. And then all of a sudden he started picking up tens of thousands of people. I have a friend in New England right now who is doing a different social media strategy and gaining 2,000 or 3,000 followers a day just by sharing content. And I mean, I think I'm a good example of how a guy in his basement, this is literally the basement of my house, can buy a microphone and start a podcast, and we'll hit 12 million downloads this month on the podcast. So I don't think the algorithm is inherently discriminatory against Christians. And as to the whole hate speech thing, I mean, if you're doing good and sharing the love of Jesus in the community and you're making a difference, I would be shocked to see how that challenges, like it would be a really interesting day to see them trying to do that. If you're like angry because the virus isn't real and it's all some hoax and it was manufactured at a lab in China, yeah, I don't know about that. But I do know if you're preaching the foundational gospel, I don't think that's a problem. The hard part about the internet, and we talk about this on my team every day, and by that I don't mean the church team, well, we talk about it there, but like the website, the podcast and everything, is the internet doesn't lie. And sometimes I write really content I'm very excited about and I work for days on and I publish it, and like my mom doesn't even read it. And then I'm like, I loved it. It was so good. And then sometimes I whip something together in an hour and I put it out there. Like, I don't think this is my best church trends post, but it's gotten global attention and it's pushing 100,000 reads. And I'm like, I put it together when I was tired over a few days. And I'm just like, well, we better publish it because people are asking for it. And it took off. And other posts I worked longer on don't take off. The internet doesn't lie. And so if you're not getting traction, it may actually be the quality of your content. And nobody likes to look at that. The last thing I would say is everyone thinks social. If I took you on the back end of my blog, so I have 28,000 followers on Instagram. Do you know how many people a day find my writing because of Instagram? About 17. Because I have 28,000 followers. Social media, Facebook translates way better. You want to look at growth on my platform, Facebook is a really good referrer. Twitter is decent. Instagram, almost nothing. The number one referrer of traffic to my website is Google search rhythms, and you can keyword search stuff. There's all kinds of resources. If you follow Neil Patel or HubSpot, they'll show you how to get keyword ranking. And then email. Nobody likes email. I promise you that you talk to any online marketer, your email list is your best friend. It is not controlled by an algorithm. You get to say what you want to say. It's direct connection with your people. You can link to content, so it doesn't have to be like super long emails. But those are the things, I talk about that all the time, and no church leader ever wants to hear about how email can change the world. But email can change the world.
Wow, that's fantastic and helpful and practical, and completely depressing that you were tired. And I think you said you were tired. You'd had a few drinks when you wrote those 7 tracks.
Yeah, you can add the few drinks. So.
Oh, sorry, I misheard. So now,
very UK, very British.
Listen, Carey, there's loads of great questions coming in. So I'm going to do that thing and ask first some pretty punchy answers.
Yes,
here.
sir.
But first of all, Glyn Barrett, amazing leader of an Audacious Church in Manchester. If we can just unmute Glyn, he's got a question that made me laugh.
Carey, thanks for your time today. Really appreciate it. Your comments before were regarding facilities, church facilities and things like that. I think in the United Kingdom, there's almost a sense where we've been approaching a season again across our nation where people are reconsidering their church facilities, building newer facilities. And many of us are about to press go on building multi-million-pound facilities. How do we hold the tension of what you were saying earlier regarding spending millions to reach thousands versus spending thousands to reach millions? And, the sense where God really hasn't surrendered the skyline, where we see many buildings being built for the glory of man. How do we hold the tension of those things? Some insight on that would be great.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I'll try to give you a short answer to that. One of the last things I did when I was lead pastor of our church in 2014, 2015 was I moved us, led the building project into our broadcast facility. And you come to Connexus today. I mean, we didn't have $10 million to spend. We just didn't. We were church. We probably just passed 1,000. We had a couple of locations. And we just, our people aren't wealthy. We're not Toronto rich. We're really suburban. And so the max of what we could do was about $3 million. So we actually took over half of a strip mall, and it was the new build. And we just did the best we could on 26,000 square feet. I don't know how many square meters that is, but 26,000 square feet. And our auditorium is only 350 seats. It's small. It's all we could afford. And what I went into that mindset was, and I used to joke when I would do tours, I would say, we built a broadcast studio with a church attached. Now, I knew that the camera was going to be the future. I knew the camera was going to be the future, but I had no idea that COVID was coming and we'd lose access to our buildings. But I knew that in the future, we would have more people watching by way of lens than others. So I would look at that, and I would look at the kind of traction you're getting online, the kind of traction you could get online, and then do a value proposition, talk to some business leaders and say, who think about this thing all day long, where's the best ROI going to be? Where's the best return on investment? And maybe scale back your physical plans by a meaningful % so that you can make sure that you're building in digital, because digital scales in a way that physical doesn't. So I'm not saying don't build buildings. We always need gathering space. But I would rather run 5 services in a small building than 1 service. And what's happening in the US, final point, because I travel quite extensively there, is all these mostly men who build these massive palaces in the 70s, 80s, and 90s with 3,000, 5,000, 7,000 seats. They're now empty. And the trend in church planting is smaller footprints. Life Church, largest church in the US, biggest auditorium seats 1,100 people. And they have 100,000 people in worship pre-COVID.
Thank you, Carey. Another massively depressing answer.
I'm good at that, Pete. I'm really good. The goal is to depress you.
We all, I want to speak on my own. Glyn, don't back off. Keep doing what you're doing. Now, next, Isaac Bourquet, otherwise known as Governor B. You've got a question, I believe.
Hey, everyone. So my question is, thanks for this, by the way. It's been very insightful. Another trend I've spotted, maybe not a new one, but it's that people want the church to be honest, open and clear about what side of the fence it's on with different issues. For example, we believe this about racism, or we've got it wrong. We've decided to do this in the future. Do you think it's possible to be clear and honest, yet inclusive? And with all of these new trends, does the church have an opportunity to build a more human and vulnerable relationship with people? And what should we be careful of? And what can we be hopeful for with this?
That's a really nuanced question. Thank you, Governor. I would say, on race, it's pretty easy. This is like, you want to be on the side of racial equality and racial justice. I mean, I think that's a very clear gospel issue. It happens to be where the kingdom is. It also happens to be where the culture is. Probably the toughest one on that is sexuality, human sexuality. We have been a lot quieter on that over the last 5 years than we were prior to that. And the reason is because our views are very, very countercultural. And outside of the whole LGBTQ question, our views are countercultural on straight sex before marriage. And so what we're doing with that is we're not leading with that. Our sort of standard line when I've taught on it is the best sex life is a surrendered sex life. So whether you're gay, whether you're straight, whether you're bi, whatever your sexuality happens to be, single, married, best sex life is a surrendered sex life. And then in group, in the context of relationship, we'll have conversations about what we believe. Now, sometimes what happens is people repent and go, I'm going to change. We're going to move out and we're going to do something. And sometimes they leave the church, but we built the relationship with them ahead of time. And then we've always been very apolitical as far as partisanship goes. And, I was involved in politics in my teens and early 20s, and I have clear views on that, but I've never come out in favor of a candidate, never come out in favor, because we want to be a place where people of all political persuasions, economic persuasions, races, and sexualities can experience the gospel and let the Holy Spirit do the work. So, but I think on race, that's an issue where I would be, and we're devoting a whole week to it this weekend, and then I wove it into my message the last few weeks. But that's something where
Awesome.
I think we have to be seen.
Thank you, Carey. Brilliant and helpful. Amy or Ewing?
Hi, thanks, Pete. I thought the 48% thing was really fascinating. And obviously we can see as well that lots of people are liking digital church, but in my research, teenagers are not flocking to online church. And I would include we have 3 children who are teenagers, and they're just not loving it at all. I don't know whether that has to do with because they're online for school at the moment, hopefully going back in September, or because church isn't on the sort of platforms that young people are congregating on online. But have you seen any examples of excellence in building traction with young teenagers, school-age children online in terms of sort of reaching out digitally?
Amy, let me just say I'm sorry about the loss of Ravi Zacharias. I believe you worked with him quite closely, so I'm so sorry. Oh, just to depress Pete more, because that's sort of my mission today.
You've succeeded.
Thank you, Pete. I don't know any church that's crushing it with teenagers online right now. That's a really tough one. And when you really start to scratch the surface, and again, all the data is incomplete, we don't know 100%. There's a generational shift happening. And I know that's really close to David Kinnaman's heart. He and I might drill down on that this summer in the Church Pulse Weekly podcast that we do. That said, I think you might be right about platforms. And see, we have a method, right? The method is, here's our service and here's our sermon. Please watch it. And teenagers are going, no, but do they really? So these are like thinking in pencil. They don't sit down to watch an hour of anything. They'll watch a 2-minute clip on YouTube. They'll watch this. I know one communicator, JP Bacluda in Texas, who hired a YouTuber to change how he does his messages. So I think we're going to have to get innovative. I think we're going to have to get outside the box. But I do think that, you know, that 40-minute monologue and then why aren't the 17-year-olds watching? That's different. I do know they're a little more conservative financially than millennials. I do know that Gen Z tends to be less active sexually, but that's probably because of porn, they think. So they are watching stuff. They're the most digital generation, but I think it's going to take innovation. And Youth Alpha would be a great example, like what Jason Ballard and the team did for Youth Alpha in kind of reinvigorating it. I think it's going to take a lot more innovation along those lines to reach the next generation. I don't know who's cracked the code.
Yeah, I don't know, pardon me, about cracking the code, but about this moment, like within the last couple of months, teens are just feeling so socially isolated that I think I wouldn't want to draw too many conclusions by how they're responding to one more online forum at this particular moment. And when they move into a place where they can be more social, and you know, that's such an important part of the teenage years. And I know teens who are really suffering right now with just the emotions attached to being isolated from their friends. We may see more positive responses from our teens to, you know, a digital environment as we move out of self-isolation.
On that note, thank you for raising that, Tony. The church leaders I have talked to, like, this is legal as of Friday in our province. You can gather with groups of up to 10 socially distanced. The church leaders I've seen in student ministry and kids ministry, kids are dying to be with their friends. They're social creatures. So maybe it's the physical reinvention of small groups. Small groups in our case are thriving right now. We've never had more people in small groups. And even though our church isn't going to reopen because it's too weird, we're giving groups the permission to responsibly gather. And I think you're going to see that shoot through the roof. So it might actually be physical ministry that might be a key.
That's so helpful. Thank you. Linked to that, Simon Holly has got a great question.
Hey, Carey. Thanks, Pete. Hi, Carey and Tony. Nice to have you with us. Thank you. I see this drive to the home. I see that. One of the histories in the UK is we've always had groups that said, no, church should be in the home, forget the whole buildings, let's get to the home. The problem was none of them were missional. It was all exciting for a year or two, but then it just became a group of Christians. They fell out with each other and then there was nothing left. My nervousness as it goes to the home again is it just becomes more consumeristic. People don't even have to leave their homes to get to church. And how do we avoid that? How do we make the kind of home gathering more missional such that we come out of this with greater impact and greater traction rather than less?
Well, I think that's an astute observation, Simon. To me, home churches have always been a collection of disgruntled Christians who are non-missional. I don't like your church. I don't like your church. I don't like your church. So I'm going to start my own and we're just going to sit around and complain.
Exactly.
And, yeah. So I think that's got no future, 100%. What I do see, and I think buildings like I had the privilege of interviewing Tim Keller a couple months ago, and that episode's now live. But one of the things he said is, he says, no one should aspire to lead a church of more than 1,000 people, because having led Redeemer to 5,000 people, he's like, it's so complicated. On the other hand, he says what most people would say, and it's a paradox. Large churches can do things that small churches can't. It's just true. And I think the future of church is moving to more expressions of smaller churches. So rather than having the mausoleum of 5,000 seats that no successor can fill, it'll be more of, we built a whole bunch of 300 seat locations in different cities, very much because, again, my exposure in your country is limited. What I saw in HTB in London looked really good, like taking old buildings that weren't particularly large and repurposing them. And I think the UK is full of churches that seat 100 to 300 people. And I think revitalizing those facilities as local centers, but then thinking rather than those of the locus where everything happens, equipping the people who gather in that space. So it's a church of 1,000, it's a church of 300, it's a church of 3,000 distributed, but really the primary location is here in the home. The primary emphasis is here in the home. And you, Carey, have a responsibility to your wife, and you have responsibility to your kids and to your neighbors. And then we gather together in our buildings and we equip you. Like, I wonder if that's a little bit closer to the future.
Yeah, it's actually an exciting opportunity to reimagine what's possible. I mean, one of the thoughts that went through my mind a few weeks ago was, if I'm spending my time connecting with church online and it's maybe, taking 45 minutes or an hour out of my morning, what if our group actually used the balance of the time where I would normally be at church on Sunday, and we do enter into a missional project together? And, how is it that we can reimagine what we're doing so that we add more outreach, more just getting out into the community?
Brilliant. That's so helpful. On the chat forum, Louise Yagnazar, who is with her husband Dave, one of the leaders in a ministry called Elam, serving the church in Iran, which is the fastest growing church in the world, as you know, is saying in their context, they're obviously finding home churches are explosively growing and can be very dynamic missionally. So thanks for that, Louise, and we're grateful for all that you're doing, serving that brave and dynamic church. Rachel Gardner, who's a great friend and hero of ours. Rachel, you've got a great question about this missional impulse, but particularly with regard to those who are maybe less able to access technology.
Thank you so much, Tony and Carey. It's great. It's really so provocative. So we planted a church in one of these old buildings in a northern city 4 months into lockdown. Then lockdown happened. And I suppose my question is, what does embracing the digital default culture, what does that look like in a city where we have such tech poverty? So to get people to access Alpha online, we drive round to their houses each week and pay out, give them a card, or we pay for their tech so they can do that. And so it's a question really, are we going to see two-tiered churches, some that have to make a building the locus, because actually that is kind of what the city needs, a place to attend. And so it's an unformed question really, Carey and Tony, but I'm just thinking, what does that look like in a city where tech poverty is not just a few people, but right across a city? How do we do church planting into new cities if that's what we're facing?
Oh, it's a great question. I think ministry is always contextual, right? So if that's where you are and there's a tech poverty there, for sure you have to respond to it. One of the questions I've gotten, from people who say, what about older adults? Well, almost every older adult has a Facebook account, has that kind of thing. And so I would also, I would look at what is possible rather than what's not possible. One of the things I love about church leaders is we have a heart for those who are excluded. We have a heart for, that one person who can't make it, for that one person who doesn't have Facebook. Now, it sounds like you've got a more systematic thing, but yeah, perhaps it's going to be, you're in a context where, let's say 50% don't have internet access or can't afford computers or smartphones or that kind of thing. Then you respond to that context. However, what I encourage, just to take this a little bit broader, is what I encourage church leaders, because I've gotten that question a lot, not as specific as your context, which really does sound different, but church leaders in this era are famous for saying, but I'm so different. It's like, well, kind of live in a monoculture. And sometimes the changes are generational. So for sure, if you're 80, you're a little less tech savvy than when you're 18. But if you're looking at the future of the church and the people we're trying to reach, you're going to build that largely on young adults, children, student ministry. Where are they technologically? And it's like, to be a classic Canadian, it's the old Wayne Gretzky quote, don't skate to where the puck is, skate to where the puck is going. And I think it was Boris Johnson years ago I heard say that right now the internet's the size of a golf ball, soon it'll be the size of the sun. And I think that's just something to pay attention to. So you probably want to build tech in the background, even if you're going to address it less aggressively than other churches would.
Mm. I wonder too whether, you know, where there is an area of real tech poverty. I mean, that's a real issue, because so much of the world now is available online, and some of it even only accessible online. I just wonder whether it's an opportunity for advocacy by the church. Even the church may be able to help facilitate resources or raise resources to help meet that need, but also play an advocacy role with the government community service institutions, where you might be able to invite them to, you know, we're willing to forward this amount to help relieve the tech poverty. Government, would you also join us to just help raise the level in that community? Just
That's a great point. And in the same way, we never hesitate to give out groceries or financial aid. Maybe, you know, in the future, you know, we think of tech as a luxury. It's kind of a necessity these days. And if they can't access your church, they probably can't access employment. They can't access the rest of the world. So maybe we start giving out, you know, phones or laptops in the same way, or subsidizing that we've done to food and other things in the past.
Sorry about that, but John Finch, excellent question, I thought, from you.
Yeah, thank you so much, guys. Just the numbers of church attendance is exciting, but people are observing, and we're trying to build a church culture around people contributing and having meaningful input. And so love some wisdom on making that transition from an observer to a contributor and someone with meaningful connection and relationship to your community.
Yeah, John, thank you. I appreciate that. And you're right. You know, everything from 3-second Facebook views, which some people would be, those of us who love to pad our numbers would say, oh, that counts. It's like, well, do you count everybody who drives by your building on a Sunday as attenders? Like, I don't think that really works. But I don't think it's all that different from what happens in a church building. So think about it. Hopefully, I think a lot of you lead churches where pretty much every week there's a new guest, right? And that new guest may not want to talk to the host. Let's talk about normal times where churches are open. Okay. That guest may not want to talk to the host, may not want to talk to your greeters, may want to sit in the back row like this, you know, listening, sneak out before the final song's over, and not identify themselves at all. Well, your job as a church leader is to get that person to take a step. And you know that taking a personal step is often indicative or a gateway to taking a spiritual step. And so what you'd love to do is have them next time interact with somebody, or perhaps fill out a new here card, as we would do here, or perhaps say, I'm going to take Alpha. I'm going to go on Alpha. I don't know. Or go to an introductory session where somebody explains what Alpha is, because they have no idea what Alpha is. Or maybe then they join a small group and so on. So it's a question of taking steps. And we show remarkable patience with that when people are in person. And I think the exact same thing has to happen online. So one of the things you can do, what we've done in this season at Connexus Church, because so many people, we all have jobs, but nobody has jobs, is we've divided our team into content and connection. So you can't do like building ministry right now. So you're either connecting with people online or you're doing content. So you're either responsible for content creation and production and uploading, or you're connecting with people in the chat going, hey, Pete and Sammy, welcome. You're joining us from the UK. That's awesome. So you want people, and I'm just going to give you a quick list, like identify themselves in the chat. So rather than me live streaming, it's more like this, where it's like, we want to hear your questions today. Okay, John's got a question from England. Simon's got a question. Rachel has a question about the unique context of her time, and kind of answer those in the chat. We also have, and software varies from country to country. If you go to connexuschurch.com, you'll see new here, text us. We have a text to service. And so rather than having people fill out a card and leave it with the office, you know, we just have them text us and then they enter our database. You can do some email captures. And then once you build some kind of personal connection where I know, oh, that's Pete and Sammy. Oh, that's Thando. It's like, hey, Thando, Yeah, you were asking about baptism. We'd love to have a conversation with you about it. Pete and Sammy, oh, total atheists. Okay. Well, you know what we'd love to do? We'd love to have you join us for Alpha. It's designed for people like you. So you almost become this concierge online where you're directing people. And I'll let you guys know about this. I was in a meeting on Monday with someone who's done quite well and started a tech company on behalf of the church. We're soon going to be rolling out with one of my partners software that allows you to start to micro-identify the people who are watching online. And that's not nearly as creepy as it sounds. There's privacy protections built in, but you'd be able to know that there's 48 families watching Holy Trinity Brompton from this area where you don't have a church. And then you'll be able to target Facebook ads at those 48 families saying, join us for Alpha, or join us this weekend, or have you got a question, leave it here. In the same way, the best example is, you know how you've gone online and you wanted to buy a pair of shoes and then you've not purchased, and then the next time you look at your phone, everything's a shoe ad? It's that technology that's then brought to the church. So I think we're going to go there in the next year, and you'll be able to be way more personal in your digital outreach.
So helpful. I bought a pair of green canvas trousers online a couple of weeks ago. They're really horrible. My wife laughs at me. I've now been offered so much green canvas clothing I could entirely camouflage myself. This is super helpful, but I just really conscious of people's time and how much time people do spend on screens at the moment. Where do you suggest we look next? We're obviously all going to be following you and reading your blogs, Carey, and we're so grateful for your insight. It's just a time we're all moving at speed and in great danger of reacting and not acting. It is so helpful to have trusted voices, and we're grateful. I suspect you have to pay an enormous price to it must be a lot of work to do that. We're really grateful, and it's actually really helped to have a Canadian voice, because it feels like you're sort of part British, part American, and bring us
Commonwealth.
a perspective.
And we know how to make a good cup of tea, so that we understand.
So we're incredibly grateful to you, and there are some other great. I'm so sorry. I was just reading through all the questions and seeing quite a lot in the chat forum as well. And I wish we could spend the rest of the day answering all these. They are such fascinating questions. But I suspect that's your role, Carey and Tony, is to provoke the questions and help us to think. So thank you for that.
That's the case. Yeah.
Great, Ken.
Well, again, thank you to both of you and to everyone who has been participating. Obviously, bearing in mind what Carey has said, we'd love to stay in touch with you. Emails are wonderful. If you aren't on, if you're a guest, wonderful to have you with us. Do send us, please, your email contacts if you're not, so that we can keep in touch with these Windsor conversations, which we would hope to continue to have. But I'd just like to end by praying. Funnily enough, Pete mentioned the people of Issachar at the beginning, and that was what I was planning to end with, for two reasons: that they understood the times, and that's what's been so good to hear from Carey and Tony. You do understand the times. And then there is another half to that. They also knew what Israel should do, a little more difficult. And you have helped us to understand that. And we need to recognize that, yes, there are many sort of items of sociology that we need to assess, to analyze, and also to understand the prophetic and the spirituality which are attached to it. Reason and revelation that run together. And then we know how the caged bird sings because of the Spirit of God within us. And he enables us to have freedom as we've never had before, whatever the circumstances are, however uncertain the future may be, however unsettled we are in our own families and churches and communities, and are ever overwhelming, because that's what it is. These extraordinary macro movements in the world are, together with our micro stresses of each day. So I just like to pray for that, for us to have insight and to have wisdom, reason and revelation, and above all, we walk by faith. We walk by the trust in the Spirit.